What if the ocean itself holds a grudge? What if the unfathomable depths, silent for millennia, can reach out across centuries, across oceans, to claim what it believes is owed? Can a family truly outrun the ancient debts their ancestors incurred? Or are some legacies eternally bound to the crushing silence of the deep? These are not mere philosophical musings, but the chilling questions at the heart of a little-known saga. Hidden in the crags and mist of America's eastern seaboard, a story whispered only in the deepest shadows of Port Fairhaven, Maine. For generations, the Blackwood family of coastal Maine has grappled with an insidious affliction, a recurring madness and maritime demise. Their ancestral legacy, a chilling secret woven into the very fabric of the Atlantic, now demands its due. In Port Fairhaven, a desolate fishing village clinging precariously to the rugged coast, salt-weathered homes lean against the relentless Atlantic winds, their clapboard walls groaning with the weight of generations. Rusting lobster traps litter the docks, tools left where they last dropped, while the persistent cry of gulls echoes through empty streets, sounding less like birds and more like the mournful whispers of those who never returned from the sea. A profound, almost suffocating silence permeates the air, broken only by the distant rhythmic crash of waves against ancient, unyielding rock. The town itself is a forgotten relic, a place where time seems to have slowed, preserving the decay and the pervasive sense of a past that refuses to fade. The Blackwood family, the last descendants of Captain Elijah Blackwood, once a famed 18th century privateer, are now confined to their crumbling ancestral home, its windows gazing eternally towards the unforgiving ocean. Elias the patriarch bears the quiet stoicism of a man who has seen too much, while his daughter Sarah fights a growing unease, an intuitive dread that something dark lies beneath their lineage. They are not merely inhabitants of Port Fairhaven. They are its unwilling guardians, bound by a terrible terrestrial curse passed down through their blood, a legacy rooted not in cosmic forces, but in a specific, catastrophic historical encounter with something unimaginable in the ocean's depths. Their lives, though outwardly ordinary, are a prison of inherited dread, defined by a secret they can neither escape nor comprehend. The fragile peace of the Blackwood household shatters with the mysterious disappearance of Sarah's younger brother, Thomas. He vanished without a trace from his fishing boat, leaving behind only a crude, hand-drawn map of anomalous deep-sea soundings pointing directly to the Sargasso Sea, and a journal filled with feverish, indecipherable writings about singing stones and sunken guardians. This latest loss, mirroring the ancestral disappearances that plague their family history, forces Elias and Sarah to finally break their code of silence. Desperate to understand and perhaps halt the curse, they reach out to the Unspoken Sea, a renowned investigative documentary team known for their pursuit of maritime anomalies, compelling them to document their harrowing family saga and the terrifying truth behind Thomas's vanishing. The family's central struggle becomes an agonizing race against time and an unseen, relentless force. Elias battles against the encroaching madness he recognizes from his forefathers, striving to protect his remaining child from the same grim fate. Sarah, fueled by grief and a desperate need for answers, confronts the chilling possibility that their ancestral curse is not merely metaphor, but a living, ancient entity awakened by their ancestors' intrusion. Their fight is not just for survival, but for the redemption of their bloodline. To sever a connection to something ancient and malevolent that demands payment, and to prevent the Sargasso's depths from claiming another Blackwood life. Are you ready to join us on this journey into the unknown depths? The oceanic adventure is just beginning. What secrets lie beneath the Sargasso's tangled surface? The Unspoken Sea broadcast their investigations from a nondescript office on the outskirts of Boston, a hub of academic rigor and quiet skepticism. At its helm was Dr. Eris Thorne, a figure whose very name had become synonymous with the meticulous deconstruction of maritime legends. Thorne was not a man swayed by whispers or the wild-eyed testimonies of the desperate. He was a geophysicist and marine archaeologist, a scholar whose career had been built on the cold facts, hard data of sonar scans, seismic readings, and the careful excavation of submerged historical sites. His office was a testament to his discipline. Shelves crammed with technical papers, bathymetric charts pinned to every available surface, and the faint hum of high-powered computing equipment that processed gigabytes of oceanographic data. Dr. Thorne possessed an intellect as sharp and unforgiving as a deep-sea trench, and an unwavering commitment to the scientific method. He had earned his reputation not by sensationalizing the unknown, but by systematically stripping away the layers of folklore to reveal the geological, historical, or even mundane truths beneath. For Thorne, every anomaly was simply an as-yet unexplained natural phenomenon. The concept of curses, ancestral madness, or sentient entities residing in the abyss were, to him, the desperate narratives of those who lacked the tools or the resolve to confront reality. When the call came from Port Fairhaven, from the stoic Elias Blackwood and his distraught daughter Sarah, Thorne's initial reaction was characteristic. He listened patiently, his gaze fixed on the digital display of a shifting sea current map, his mind already categorizing their story. A tragic case of inherited psychological stress, perhaps, or the desperate rationalization of a family grappling with serial loss. Thomas's crude map and journal entries were presented as evidence, but to Thorne, they were merely the ravings of a troubled mind, or perhaps the fanciful doodlings of a young man consumed by the very romanticized tales he was now trying to debunk. His team, hand-picked for their equally rigorous approach, echoed his sentiment. They were accustomed to chasing phantom lights and deciphering the garbled transmissions of superstitious sailors. Their modus operandi was simple: verify, quantify, analyze. If an underwater structure was detected, it was first identified as a geological formation. If a strange sound was recorded, it was attributed to marine life or seismic activity. Only after every conventional explanation had been exhausted, and with irrefutable empirical evidence, would Thorne even consider the extraordinary. Yet, there was something in Sarah's voice, a raw, unflinching conviction that transcended mere grief, that piqued a sliver of academic interest in Thorne. The Blackwood family's detailed, century-spanning chronicle of disappearances, each echoing the last with uncanny precision, presented a historical pattern, a data set, however anecdotal. It was not the supernatural claim that drew him, but the compelling consistency of the misfortune. Could there be a forgotten historical event, a specific navigational hazard, or a unique geological phenomenon tied to their ancestral legacy? He agreed to investigate, not out of belief in their curse, but out of a professional obligation to explore every conceivable angle. For Dr. Eris Thorne, the Sargasso Sea remained, as it always had, a region of immense oceanographic interest, a vast gyre of floating seaweed and perplexing currents. Its mysteries, he was certain, would yield to the relentless scrutiny of science, not to the fearful legends of a haunted bloodline. His journey would begin, as all his journeys did, with skepticism as his compass and data as his guide. The whispers of Port Fairhaven, more than just wind, carry the chilling history of generations. At its core lies the story of Captain Elijah Blackwood, an 18th century privateer. Once a maritime legend, his true legacy, the one that haunts his descendants, began not with glory, but with an unimaginable descent. It was 1768 when Captain Blackwood's ship, the Sea Serpent, veered from its usual course. Drawn by a phantom pull, he navigated into the Sargasso Sea. This wasn't merely a gyre of floating weed, but a place whispered about in hushed tones. A graveyard of lost ships, unnaturally still, yet teeming with unseen, ancient life. Into this oceanic heart of forgotten time, Elijah steered his vessel, propelled by an explorer's insatiable curiosity and a destiny he couldn't foresee. What they encountered there defied all known charts. Not land, not wreckage, but an impossible structure, rising from the abyssal sunlight, struggling through the Sargasso's perpetual algae, cast an eerie glow on intricate carvings predating any known civilization. This was no sunken city, no Atlantis, but something far more primal, a temple or a monument to a force long dormant. As the Sea Serpent drifted silently beside this impossible edifice, the crew reported hearing it. Not a sound carried by the wind, but a vibration resonating deep within their bones, a chorus of singing stones, a low, sustained hum, impossibly beautiful, yet unsettlingly alien, emanated from the depths. It bypassed the ears, weaving into the subconscious, stirring forgotten fears. Elias's family lore speaks of men seizing, eyes wide with terror and grotesque rapture, as this unseen symphony permeated their being. They were not merely hearing. They were experiencing a cognitive assault, a fundamental reordering of reality. Captain Blackwood, a man of iron will, was not immune. His journal entries from that period, now held in the Blackwood family archives, speak of a disquieting clarity, a forced awakening, accompanied by visions of unimaginable scale. He described not just stone, but an awareness, a consciousness permeating the water around them, a presence that had been waiting. This was their first contact, not with an artifact, but with an entity, a guardian older than time, disturbed from its aeons-long slumber. The encounter was not violent, but insidiously transformative, planting seeds of alien awareness within those who heard its song. This insidious seed, this imprint of the profound and unearthly, would forever bind the Blackwood bloodline to the Sargasso's terrifying secrets. What unwitting trespass did Captain Blackwood commit in those ancient waters? And how did this silent, singing sentinel of the deep lay claim to his lineage, reaching across centuries to draw his descendants back into the abyssal embrace? Dive with us into this unexplored abyssal world. The silence in the Blackwood home was not peace, but the heavy cloak of a newly opened wound. Sarah, her eyes haunted, clutched a tattered leather-bound journal, its salt-worn pages whispering of her brother's final, desperate hours. Elias, stoic but fractured, watched the ceaseless churn of the Atlantic, a man burdened by generations of unspoken dread. Thomas's vanishing wasn't just a tragedy. It was the chilling echo of a cyclical nightmare, a family curse that now pulsed with renewed, terrifying vigor. The quiet despair that had long permeated Port Fairhaven now intensified, an almost suffocating shroud woven from generations of maritime loss and a secret too terrible to voice. Among his sparse belongings, Thomas left behind a crude yet chillingly precise hand-drawn map. Not of coastal currents or familiar fishing grounds, but of deep-sea bathymetry. It was a cartography of the impossible, faint, almost imperceptible lines converging on an anomaly in the heart of the Sargasso Sea. Geometric patterns, unlike any natural formation, hinted at structure where only abyss should reign. This wasn't the work of a sane mind charting known waters. It was the fevered obsession of a man drawn by an unseen force towards an uncharted terror, a place where the ocean floor twisted into something unnatural, something that defied every known law of geology and marine science. What secret had Thomas stumbled upon in the vast, swirling gyre of the Sargasso? But it was the journal that truly unfurled the terror. Its pages, filled with a desperate, unhinged hand, spoke not of fish or fair weather, but of visions. Feverish scrawls detailed singing stones, a chorus echoing from the deepest trenches, a symphony of ancient, resonant frequencies that seemed to call from beyond the veil of human understanding. He wrote of sunken guardians, massive, shadowed forms rousing from aeons of slumber, their awakening tied to the Blackwood bloodline itself. Thomas's words painted a picture of an intelligence, primordial and immense, lying dormant beneath the waves, now stirring. Was this the encroaching madness Elias so feared? Or was it a terrifying, undeniable lucidity born of an unimaginable encounter? The family's desperate plea reached the Unspoken Sea team, compelling us to document their harrowing saga, to peer into the abyss of their inherited dread. Elias, his voice a gravelly whisper, finally broke the code of silence that had bound his ancestors. Sarah, her grief transmuted into a fierce resolve, laid bare the chilling possibility that their ancestral curse was not mere metaphor, but a living, ancient entity awakened by Captain Elijah Blackwood's intrusion centuries ago. We began to understand that Thomas hadn't just disappeared. He had been drawn, called by an ancient debt. Dive with us into this unexplored abyssal world as we follow the faint, unsettling cartography of Thomas's map and the chilling echoes of his final words. The Blackwood family's struggle was not merely against grief, but against a relentless, unseen force rooted in the very fabric of the Atlantic. The map and the journal were not merely clues. They were an invitation, a terrifying summons from the deep. But what unimaginable depths and what ancient demanding entity waited beneath the waves, poised to claim another Blackwood life? The truth, it seemed, was not just buried. It was singing, the Blackwood family's harrowing present. Rooted in the vanishing of young Thomas and the encroaching madness, compels us to cast our gaze backward through the roiling mists of time to the genesis of this chilling legacy. For generations, the name Captain Elijah Blackwood has been whispered in the salt-laced air of Port Fairhaven, not merely as a celebrated privateer of the 18th century, but as the unwitting architect of his lineage's doom. His daring voyages across the tumultuous Atlantic, once legends of valor, now resonate with a darker, more ominous echo. What forgotten horror did this intrepid mariner unearth in the heart of the great ocean? A secret so profound it could tether a family to an eternal current of despair. Our investigation led us to weathered maritime archives, tucked away in the forgotten corners of New England's oldest libraries. Dust-laden logs, meticulously penned by Elijah's own hand, paint a vivid picture of a voyage unlike any other. In the spring of 1792, After a particularly brutal storm in the treacherous mid-Atlantic, his brig, the Serpent's Coil, found itself hopelessly adrift, pulled by an unseen current towards a region of the ocean that defied cartography, the Sargasso Sea. This vast, tranquil gyre, historically a graveyard for lost ships, became for Elijah Blackwood a gateway to an impossible truth. His logs, once filled with precise navigational data and sharp observations of the natural world, gradually devolve into frantic scrawls imbued with a growing sense of terror and wonder. It was amidst the suffocating calm of the Sargasso, surrounded by an endless tapestry of golden-brown sargassum weed, that the unthinkable occurred. Elijah's final entries describe a shift in the water itself, a luminescent glow emanating from the depths, followed by the appearance of impossible geometry beneath the waves. Not wreckage, not natural formation, but something deliberate, ancient, and undeniably alien. He wrote of cyclopean structures of black stone, walls that seemed to hum with a low, resonant frequency, and intricate carvings that defied any known earthly art. This was no mere ruin. It was a place of power, a submerged monument to an unknown civilization, or perhaps something far older and more primal. The discovery, far from being a moment of triumph, marked the turning point. Immediately after his encounter with what he termed the sunken citadel, Elijah Blackwood's demeanor began to fracture. His crew, too, exhibited unsettling changes, fits of irrational fear, vivid hallucinations, and a profound collective melancholy that clung to them like the sea mist. Many perished on the return voyage, not from storms or illness, but from a mysterious wasting sickness, their minds unraveling long before their bodies succumbed. Elijah himself returned a changed man, haunted by visions, plagued by an unshakable dread, and muttering about singing stones and guardians of the deep that had awakened. The initial prosperity of the Blackwood line quickly curdled. Subsequent generations found themselves inexplicably drawn back to the Sargasso, whether by conscious desire or an unseen compulsion. Each voyage brought a new wave of madness, a new disappearance, a new payment extracted by the depths. This wasn't just a curse, it was a pact, an ancient debt initiated by Captain Elijah's intrusion. The question that hangs over Port Fairhaven, over the very fabric of the Blackwood lineage, is not merely what he found, but what found him in return. What entity, what intelligence, what forgotten horror did Captain Blackwood truly awaken in the serene yet terrifying heart of the Sargasso Sea? In Port Fairhaven, the air grew heavy, pressing on the ancient Blackwood home. Elias's stoicism cracked, revealing raw fear. His eyes, once resolute, flickered with haunted light. Past whispers became a cacophony, merging with the ocean's crash. He spoke of cold emptiness, a low, resonant thrum emanating from his core, the same sound his forefathers heard before darkness claimed them. The hereditary madness, a shadow across generations, now clearly reached for him. Sarah watched her father retreat into his mind, his terrifying transformation mirroring journal accounts of ancestral descent. Desperate, grieving Thomas and needing to protect Elias, she scoured her brother's room. Beneath a loose floorboard, a secret Thomas held, she found not a ledger, but meticulously etched slate tablets, crude yet precise. They depicted Sargasso Sea contours with radiating concentric circles, overlaid with complex musical notation. Beside them, an intricate carving of an alien, eerily familiar deep-sea creature. These tablets, lucid and scientific, suggested Thomas found a method to interact with whatever lay beneath. The singing stones were no metaphor. These were a key, perhaps a device for activation. As Sarah traced the lines, a low, imperceptible hum vibrated through the floorboards, mirroring Elias's terror. It carried an ancient language, a primordial song from unimaginable depths. The carved creature, she realized, was the sunken guardian Thomas referenced, inextricably linked to the hum now drawing them in. This was no mere curse of the mind. This was a direct, terrifying communication, a resonance from the deep, awakened by Thomas's desperate quest. Myth and reality dissolved. The Sargasso Sea was not just legend, but an active, conscious entity reaching into their world. The Blackwood Curse was a tangible, malevolent presence, demanding more than ancestral tribute. It was calling, a siren song from the abyssal darkness. Could they be hearing the call of something ancient and alive, beckoning them towards a fate sealed centuries ago? The oceanic adventure is just beginning. Stay with us, because what we are about to reveal may change your perception of the oceans forever. The fog clung to Port Fairhaven like a shroud, mirroring the weight that seemed to press down upon every weathered clapboard house, every salt-stained fishing boat. It was a place where silence wasn't absence, but a presence, thick with untold stories and unshed tears. This desolate corner of Maine, where the Atlantic's ceaseless roar felt less like a comfort and more like a mournful dirge, was our destination. We were the unspoken sea, drawn by a summons from a family, teetering on the precipice of an ancient horror, a family haunted not by ghosts, but by a bloodline tethered to the crushing depths. Our initial encounter with Elias Blackwood was marked by a quiet stoicism, a man whose eyes held the weary wisdom of generations burdened by an incomprehensible secret. His daughter, Sarah, presented a more urgent desperation, a desperate fire in her gaze that spoke of a love for her vanished brother Thomas and a chilling premonition of what awaited them. Their ancestral home, a decaying sentinel gazing out at the churning gray expanse, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a mausoleum of inherited dread. Every creaking floorboard, every rattling window pane seemed to whisper tales of maritime demise. They laid before us the few remnants of Thomas's final days, a tattered, oil-stained journal and a crudely drawn map scored with trembling lines. The journal entries were a descent into a feverish obsession, fragments of a mind grappling with something utterly alien. Thomas wrote of singing stones, of voices from the deep that resonated not with sound, but with an intrinsic pull, a magnetic, almost spiritual frequency. He spoke, too, of sunken guardians, entities that held dominion over forgotten realms beneath the waves, their purpose shrouded in an unfathomable antiquity. The map, chillingly precise despite its amateur execution, pointed to a very specific, anomalous deep-sea sounding within the vast, bewildering expanse of the Sargasso Sea. This was no ordinary disappearance. This was the latest chapter in a terrifying legacy, a curse that had shadowed the Blackwood family since the 18th century, a direct consequence of Captain Elijah Blackwood's fateful encounter with the ocean's darkest secrets. What could an 18th century privateer have stumbled upon in those uncharted waters that would inflict such a lasting generational torment? And how could mere stones and guardians command such power, not just over the ocean, but over the very sanity of a bloodline? The answers, if they existed, lay buried beneath centuries of silence, guarded by the very entity that claimed the Blackwoods as its own. What terrors truly lie hidden beneath the legendary veil of the Sargasso Sea? Are you ready to dive with us into this unexplored abyssal world where history bleeds into nightmare and sanity is but a fleeting illusion? The silence that clung to Port Fairhaven was a living thing, a mournful shroud woven from generations of loss. But within the crumbling Blackwood home, the silence was shattered by the stark reminder of Thomas's final moments. His fishing boat, found drifting, empty, held two chilling artifacts, a crude map and a journal. These were not mere possessions. They were fragments of a mind unraveling, a desperate attempt to communicate a truth too terrible to grasp, a terrifying whisper from the deep. The map, drawn with frantic, uneven lines, was less a navigational aid and more a feverish diagram. It depicted an area deep within the heart of the Sargasso Sea, marked with anomalous sonar readings, impossible depths, unnatural formations, all pointing to a single, terrifying locus. It wasn't just a location. It felt like a target, a destination Thomas had been inexorably drawn towards. Sarah traced the lines with trembling fingers, a chilling premonition prickling her skin. What had he truly seen on his instruments that defied known bathymetry? What profound anomalies could compel such a solitary voyage into that infamous, weed-choked expanse, a place where ships vanished, swallowed by legend? Then there was the journal, its pages, filled with handwriting that grew progressively more erratic, spoke of whispers carried on the currents, of visions that seeped from the deepest abysses. Thomas wrote of singing stones, not geological formations, but entities that pulsed with an unheard melody, a chilling siren call from beneath the waves, a song meant for his ears alone. He described sunken guardians, not as inert statues, but as ancient, sentient protectors of something hidden, unspeakably vast. Elias, his face etched with familiar despair, recognized the terrifying pattern. Similar phrases, eerily similar obsessions, had appeared in the fragmented writings of his own grandfather and his great-grandfather before their own inexplicable disappearances into the insatiable maw of the sea. The Blackwood Curse was not just a historical tragedy. It was a recurring nightmare, a chilling blueprint of madness passed down through blood, now replaying with terrifying precision. The Unspoken Sea team, drawn by the Blackwood's desperate plea, found themselves staring into an abyss far deeper and more unsettling than any ocean trench. Our lead maritime historian, Dr. Eris Thorne, a man dedicated to unearthing the Atlantic's submerged secrets, sifted through Thomas's journal. Its contents resonated with obscure maritime folklore, fragmented accounts from the age of sail, whispered tales dismissed as fever dreams of shipwrecked sailors. But here, these wild visions were coalescing, driven by the chilling reality of Thomas's vanishing. Our own meticulous analysis, cross-referencing global sonar databases with Thomas's crude markings, began to reveal faint, almost imperceptible echoes in the very region he had marked, anomalies too significant to be natural, too precise to be coincidence, suggesting a hidden structure beneath the waves. Could Thomas have stumbled upon something real? Something ancient and terrible? Long forgotten, yet still active? Or was this merely the latest manifestation of a hereditary delusion? A psychological burden passed through generations, culminating in a tragic, self-fulfilling prophecy orchestrated by a family's inherited madness. The line between an ancient truth and a descent into the deepest recesses of the mind blurred with every turn of the journal's page. Are we witnessing the echoes of a collective trauma or the insidious whispers of an entity patiently waiting for its time to rise? Dive with us into this unexplored abyssal world, for the oceanic adventure is just beginning. What song did those stones sing? And what do the sunken guardians truly protect? Dr. Aris Thorne, a man whose life work had been to chart the unseen sonic landscapes of the abyssal plain, now pored over Thomas Blackwood's hastily scribbled notes. The very air in the Blackwood home felt heavy, thick with generations of unspoken dread. But Thorne found himself drawn not to the chilling tales Elias recounted, but to the tangible, a worn, salt-stained journal. Its pages were filled with desperate, almost frantic handwriting, charting not just depths, but an escalating descent into obsession. Singing stones, Thomas had scrawled repeatedly, alongside intricate, non-Euclidean patterns that seemed to pulse with an unseen geometry. At first, Thorne dismissed them as fever dreams, the product of a mind teetering on the edge of the inherited madness Elias spoke of. Yet beneath the chaotic lines, there was a meticulousness, an underlying logic that belied mere delusion. Thomas had not simply imagined these sounds. He had attempted to document them. The accompanying map, crudely drawn on aged parchment, revealed a singular focus, a precise coordinates block within the vast, seaweed-choked expanse of the Sargasso Sea. But it was not the coordinates that gave Thorne pause. It was the annotations, minuscule symbols clustered around the target zone. Symbols that, to his trained eye, resembled a rudimentary form of sonic notation, almost like a primordial musical score. Could Thomas have been attempting to transcribe something truly alien? The Unspoken Sea team, accustomed to the bizarre, still felt a tremor of unease. Thomas's scrawls weren't just descriptions. They were a desperate attempt at communication. He wrote of frequencies that twisted the mind, of resonances that tugged at the very fabric of memory. His final entries spoke less of discovery and more of a terrifying reciprocal awareness. He wasn't just finding something. Something was finding him. Thorne began cross-referencing Thomas's notations with known geological formations and deep-sea acoustic phenomena. Nothing aligned. The patterns were too complex, too deliberate for natural occurrences. He even consulted archived naval sonar data from the region, searching for anomalies. What he found was unsettling. Decades of unclassified soundings from the Sargasso showed fleeting, inexplicable harmonic pulses, often dismissed as equipment malfunction or unusual whale song. Yet they occurred with a disturbing regularity precisely within Thomas's marked zone. This was no random affliction. This was a response. Elias's fear, Sarah's intuitive dread, they were echoes of a much larger, darker symphony. The singing stones were not geological nor entirely biological. They were perhaps something else entirely. As Thorne traced one of Thomas's more elaborate symbols, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration resonated through the aged parchment. A sensation so subtle it could have been imagination. Yet it lingered, a cold, metallic hum deep within the bone. Was this the first contact Thomas had unknowingly made? And if so, what kind of entity communicated not through wounds, but through an ancient, unsettling melody that drove men mad? Elias's warning echoed in the quiet room. It demands its due. What exactly had Thomas awoken, or worse, summoned from the depths with his relentless pursuit of the Sargasso's secrets? The oceanic adventure is just beginning. Thomas's room, a testament to a mind consumed by the ocean's enigma, offered no easy answers. His scattered notes, a maelstrom of frantic sketches and cryptic symbols, painted a portrait of a man teetering on the precipice of a terrifying revelation. The hand-drawn map, its lines precise yet hauntingly vague, focused on an impossible convergence within the Sargasso, a point marked by an almost childish drawing of a jagged, towering structure. But it was his journal, its pages water-stained and warped, that held the true horror. Here, the feverish script spoke not of treasure or discovery, but of an oppressive, ancient presence. He wrote of the song, a low, resonant thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the deep, a sound that drove men mad, yet compelled them towards its source. And then the guardians, described as colossal, silent sentinels rising from the abyssal plains, their forms indistinct yet undeniably watchful. Elias Blackwood, his eyes hollowed by a lifetime of inherited dread, watched our team sift through his son's final desperate pleas for understanding. Sarah, however, found a chilling parallel. "He wasn't describing a place," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind rattling the old house. "He was describing a torment, the same torment that took my grandfather and his father before him." The Blackwood Family Archives, a trove of maritime logs and personal diaries stretching back to Captain Elijah, revealed a disturbing pattern. Not merely disappearances, but accounts of inexplicable terror, of men hearing the sea's lament before their vessels vanished without a trace, often near the very coordinates Thomas had meticulously drawn. Was this shared madness merely a coincidence, a familial predisposition to the cruelties of the sea, or something far more insidious, a hereditary echo of an encounter that transcended time itself? One entry, dated 1803, from a merchant vessel captained by Elias's great-great-grandfather, Nathaniel Blackwood, stood out. It spoke of a sudden, unnatural stillness in the Sargasso, a suffocating calm, broken only by a deep, vibrational hum that seemed to penetrate the hull itself. The log detailed the crew's rapid descent into paranoia, their visions of immense, shadowy forms moving beneath the waves. Nathaniel, a man known for his unflappable courage, documented his own struggle against an overwhelming urge to jump overboard, to join the chorus. He described a profound sense of ancient intelligence, not malevolent, but indifferent, a force that simply was. This chilling account ended abruptly, with the logbook found adrift weeks later, the ship and its crew never seen again. The parallels to Thomas's recent entries were too stark to ignore, painting a grim tapestry of inherited trauma, each generation drawn inexorably closer to the source of their ancestral torment. But what if the madness was not a curse, but a desperate attempt to communicate, a distorted echo of an unimaginable truth imprinted upon the Blackwood psyche? What if Thomas, in his final days, was not succumbing to the affliction, but finally understanding it? The implications send a shiver through the very foundation of our understanding of human perception and the ocean's vast, untouched mysteries. We began to realize this wasn't just a family tragedy. It was a key, perhaps the only key, to unlocking a secret the Sargasso Sea has guarded for millennia. Dive with us into this unexplored abyssal world as we trace the footsteps of the Blackwoods, not into madness, but into the chilling heart of an ancient enigma. For the closer we look, the more the lines between sanity and revelation begin to blur. pulling us deeper into the ocean's embrace. And what if the guardians Thomas spoke of are not merely constructs of a fevered mind, but something real, something ancient, stirring from its ageless slumber beneath the waves, waiting? The whispers of Port Fairhaven, once dismissed as mere folklore, find their chilling echo in the forgotten logs of Captain Elijah Blackwood. His privateering exploits, celebrated in dusty maritime archives, mask a far more sinister journey. One that began not with gold, but with an encounter in the very heart of the Sargasso Sea. It was here, amidst the tangled golden weed and unsettling calm, that the initial thread of the Blackwood family's torment was woven. In the spring of 1793, Captain Blackwood's brigantine, the Sea Serpent, was becalmed for weeks in the infamous region. A vast expanse of ocean, known then, as now, for its strange currents and eerie stillness. Forced to wait for a breath of wind, the crew began to notice anomalies. Not just the usual flotsam of the Sargasso, but massive, unnaturally smooth stones, their surfaces bearing faint, almost imperceptible etchings. Stones that, according to Elijah's own meticulous, yet increasingly frantic journal entries, seemed to hum. A low, resonant thrum that permeated the very hull of the ship, burrowing into the minds of the men. This was no ordinary discovery of a forgotten wreck. Elijah, a man of iron will and sharp intellect, described an architecture emerging from the depths. Not wood, not coral, but something alien, colossal, and undeniably ancient. He wrote of structures that defied known engineering, of dark, smooth surfaces that absorbed light. Sailors, once hardy and pragmatic, spoke of a singing in the water, a siren call not of beauty, but of madness. Elias Blackwood, poring over these ancestral notes, finds chilling parallels to Thomas's own fragmented writings about singing stones. Could the same insidious melody have driven them both to the edge? Elijah's journals detail the first signs of the curse's physical manifestation. Men, once strong, grew gaunt, their eyes hollow. Some spoke in tongues, others simply stared blankly at the unending horizon, before one by one slipping over the side, drawn by an invisible current. The deaths were not accidental. They were drawn, compelled. Elijah himself, a rational man, began to document a growing dread within himself, a gnawing obsession with the submerged structures, coupled with a terrifying premonition of their vengeful power. He spoke of an ancient intelligence roused from millennia of slumber, disturbed by their presence, and now demanding recompense. The journey back was a harrowing descent into collective delirium. Fewer men returned than sailed, and those who did carried a shadow in their eyes, a deep-seated madness that would plague their descendants. The first Blackwood madness, the true genesis of the curse, began here, a direct consequence of breaching a forbidden sanctuary in the Sargasso Sea. Elijah, upon his return, was a changed man, haunted, obsessed, yet unable to articulate the full horror he had witnessed. He sealed his journals, locked away the truth, hoping to bury it with himself. But some truths refuse to be buried. Some debts demand to be paid, generation after generation. What forbidden knowledge did Captain Blackwood truly uncover? And what ancient pact was unwittingly forged that day in the Sargasso's heart, condemning his bloodline for centuries to come? The suffocating silence of Port Fairhaven, once a melancholic backdrop, began to twist into something far more sinister within the Blackwood home. It was not merely the weight of generations of loss, but a new, almost predatory stillness that settled in the air, broken only by the distant, ceaseless groan of the ocean. Elias, once stoic, now moved with a palpable tremor in his hands, his gaze often drifting past Sarah, fixed on unseen horizons. The madness that had claimed Blackwood men for centuries was no longer a whispered legend. It was a shadow lengthening across their living room, its tendrils wrapping around Elias's mind. Sarah watched, helpless and horrified, as her father's decline accelerated. His dreams became waking nightmares, filled with the crushing pressure of the deep, the faint, disorienting echo of unseen voices, and the chilling sensation of ancient eyes watching from the abyss. He spoke in fragmented sentences of singing stones, not the melodious tones of a siren, but a dissonant, grinding hum that vibrated through the very bones of the house. Particularly when he mirrored Thomas's journal, now an object of both obsession and terror. These were not mere delusions. They were sensory assaults, shared whispers from a dimension beyond human comprehension, pulling at the frayed edges of his sanity. The lines between his reality and the oceanic depths began to blur, then shatter. One evening, a chilling manifestation pierced the fragile veneer of normalcy. As a storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil within, Elias began to transcribe strange symbols onto the dusty pages of an old family ledger. Symbols eerily reminiscent of those crudely sketched on Thomas's map. He spoke of the Guardian's Call, a low, resonant frequency that he claimed only Blackwood blood could perceive, a call that promised ultimate clarity or ultimate oblivion. His eyes, usually clouded with sorrow, gleamed with an unsettling lucidity, as if some alien intelligence now peered through them. He was not just hearing the Sargasso, he was becoming its unwilling conduit. This wasn't just a mental breakdown, it was an invasion, a direct communication from the entity Thomas had described, a physical and psychological infiltration that left Elias gasping for air, clutching his head, yet compelled to continue his arcane scribblings. The air in the room grew heavy, tasting of salt and something metallic, something ancient. Sarah felt a cold dread, a primal instinct screaming at her to flee. Yet she stood transfixed, bearing witness to a legacy of terror unfolding before her very eyes. Her father was disappearing, piece by piece, into the maw of a mystery centuries old. Are you ready to uncover the secrets of the deep? What ancient secret, slumbering in the Sargasso's depths, could exert such dominion over a bloodline, across generations, across oceans? And what would it demand next from the last of the Blackwoods? The whispers of the sea, once a comforting lullaby to the residents of Port Fairhaven, have, for generations, been a prelude to terror for the Blackwood lineage. Thomas's journal, a desperate scrawl against the encroaching madness, speaks not only of a map leading to the Sargasso, but of singing stones, an enigmatic phrase, yet one that reverberates with a chilling resonance, echoing through centuries of maritime folklore and forgotten scientific inquiries. Are these mere poetic ramblings of a troubled mind, or do they point to an objective, horrifying reality beneath the waves? Our investigation led us down an unexpected tributary of historical accounts, far removed from the Blackwood family's direct lineage, yet eerily connected. Records from the late 19th century, unearthed in the archives of various oceanographic institutions along the North Atlantic coast, spoke in hushed tones of peculiar acoustic phenomena reported by mariners traversing the Sargasso. Not the groaning of ships, nor the cries of gulls, but deep, sustained hums, and complex, almost melodic reverberations emanating from the abyss. Fishermen, whalers, and even early transatlantic cable layers documented these sounds, often attributing them to vast, unknown marine life or geological anomalies. But some spoke of a different quality, a sound that seemed to resonate not just through the water, but directly into the very minds of those who heard it, inducing disorientation, vivid hallucinations, and in some tragic cases, profound madness. One particularly disturbing account found within the journals of a forgotten British survey ship, the HMS Challenger, a vessel renowned for its pioneering deep-sea explorations, describes an incident in the Sargasso in 1874. A sailor, after hours of listening to what he described as the song of the sunken world, began to exhibit extreme paranoia, claiming the ocean itself was speaking to him, demanding an unspoken tribute. He vanished overboard days later, his shipmates attributing his demise to the Sargasso madness. Coincidence? Or a pattern emerging, connecting these historical oddities to the Blackwood's inherited affliction? The scientific community of that era, limited by nascent technology, struggled to explain these phenomena. Theories ranged from unique underwater currents creating resonant cavities to hydrothermal vents emitting infrasonic frequencies. Yet, none fully accounted for the psychological impact described. Modern oceanographers, with their advanced hydrophones and sonar mapping, have occasionally detected anomalous, low-frequency sounds from the Sargasso, sometimes dubbed bioducks or whale songs, of unknown origin. But these are typically isolated events, fleeting whispers in the vast silence of the deep. What if the sounds experienced by those old sailors, and perhaps by Thomas Blackwood, were of a different order entirely? What if the singing stones are not merely geological formations, but ancient constructs designed to resonate, to communicate, or perhaps to control? This hypothesis, while bordering on the speculative, provides a chilling new lens through which to view the Blackwood Purse. If the Sargasso harbors structures capable of emitting sounds that disrupt the human mind, then Elijah Blackwood's initial discovery might have inadvertently activated a dormant mechanism, one that has since found a grotesque resonance within his bloodline. The madness, then, would not be a mere genetic predisposition, but an ongoing, generational exposure to an ancient sonic assault. A legacy not just of dread, but of constant, unheard torment. The questions multiply, each more unsettling than the last. Were these singing stones naturally occurring, or were they deliberately placed? And if so, by whom? What purpose did they serve? And most critically, why, after centuries of silence, have they seemingly reawakened, echoing a death knell specifically for the Blackwood family? The ocean's depths guard secrets not only of life, but of mind, and perhaps of dominion. The pursuit of these answers drags us deeper into a labyrinth of sound and silence, where the line between natural phenomenon and ancient malevolence blurs into a horrifying truth. Are you ready to dive deeper into the chilling symphony of the Sargasso? The whisper of the Sargasso, so often dismissed as the lament of the wind through tangled seaweed, began to take on a more sinister cadence when we delved deeper into Thomas Blackwood's feverish scrawlings. Singing stones, he had called them, his hand shaking on the page. Ancient guardians that hum a forgotten melody. This wasn't merely the product of a fevered mind. It was a fragment of a much larger, more terrifying mosaic. For generations, the sea had been a canvas for human fears, a repository for the unexplainable. But what if some of those tales, woven into the fabric of maritime lore, were not just metaphors, but echoes of a truth too profound to comprehend. Our investigation led us to forgotten archives, to dust-choked logbooks, and dispatches long considered spurious. Among them, a chilling account from a Dutch merchant captain, Hendrik van der Meer, who, in 1789, nearly a decade after Elijah Blackwood's fateful voyage, reported an incident in the very heart of the Sargasso. His crew, gripped by an inexplicable malaise, spoke of an omnipresent, low-frequency thrumming emanating from beneath the waves. A sound they described not as a ship's groan or a whale's song, but as a stone choir, a resonant vibration that seemed to seep into their very bones, stirring latent fears and driving some to the brink of delirium. Van der Meer, a man of stark practicality, documented the unusual behavior, the inexplicable dread, and the profound shared hallucinations that plagued his ship for days, before a sudden, terrifying shift in currents propelled them out of the Sargasso's grasp. His account was officially attributed to scurvy or contaminated provisions, dismissed by the Admiralty as the ramblings of a crew unhinged by isolation. Yet, the chilling parallels to Thomas's journal, to the ancestral madness that had gripped the Blackwood line for centuries, were undeniable. This was not an isolated incident. More reports, scattered across centuries and languages, began to surface. A Spanish brig in 1650, its crew found dead, bodies intact. Eyes wide with horror, the only clue a strange rhythmic vibration described by the single survivor as the pulse of a buried titan. A lost American whaler in 1823, found drifting empty, save for a single, crudely carved effigy of a faceless, monolithic figure clutching a radiating stone, its surface vibrating with an unseen energy, echoing the very essence of Thomas's singing stones. These were not legends from coastal villages, but official, if suppressed, reports from hardened mariners. The paradox grew heavier with each discovery. If Captain Elijah Blackwood had discovered something, then why did the Sargasso already seem to possess a malevolent influence, documented by others, sometimes centuries earlier? Was the Blackwood curse merely a unique and terrifying manifestation of a pre-existing ancient power that had always resided in those mysterious depths? Or had Elijah's intrusion merely reawakened something that had merely slumbered, its ancient song, a siren call to those whose bloodline now resonated with its forgotten frequency? The line between discovery and trespass blurred, a chilling question echoing across the centuries. Could the Blackwood family's torment be less about a singular event and more about a sustained, terrifying interaction with an entity that had been claiming victims long before their ancestor ever charted its dark currents? The silence of Port Fairhaven, once a refuge, now felt like a shroud tightening around Elias and Sarah as the chilling fragments of Thomas's journal continued to surface. Each indecipherable scroll, each frantic sketch of impossible geometry. The Blackwood family's archives, a dusty collection of brittle letters and salt-stained logbooks, hinted at a voyage unlike any other, a detour into the inexplicable that sealed their fate. Elias, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, recounted tales passed down through generations, stories of a calm that descended upon Elijah's ship in the Sargasso's heart, a stillness so profound it felt unnatural, as if the very ocean held its breath. It was there, amidst the unending golden expanse of Sargassum weed, that their ancestor reportedly stumbled upon not just a ruin, but a presence, a series of ancient, colossal stones, partially submerged, pulsing with a faint, otherworldly luminescence, their surfaces not carved, but grown, organic and alien, were the singing stones Thomas had scrawled about, their silent melody a siren call through the water. Elijah, a man hardened by storms and battle, was said to have been drawn to them, compelled by an invisible force. His logbook, its ink faded but still legible, spoke of an unholy resonance emanating from the depths, a soundless vibration that settled in the very marrow of his bones. It was not a sound in the ear, but a pressure in the mind, a chorus of whispers that promised both forbidding knowledge and unimaginable horror. This was the first contact. Not with an entity in flesh and blood, but with an ancient intelligence communicated through the very fabric of the deep. What began as curiosity swiftly transformed into a terrifying understanding, a communion that shattered the fragile boundaries of human perception. The log entries grew more erratic, the captain's hand shaking, his prose dissolving into maddened outbursts. He described not just seeing, but feeling the vastness of something incomprehensible stirring beneath the weed, something that had slumbered for eons. The stones, he wrote, were conduits, anchors for a power beyond mortal reckoning. They did not merely hum, they imprinted upon the mind, planting seeds of an alien consciousness. The crew, too, began to show signs, their eyes haunted, their conversations devolving into fearful whispers about shapes in the water, about shadows that moved against the lightless backdrop of the abyss. This wasn't merely a discovery, it was an infection of the soul, a psychic invasion from the depths. When Elijah finally broke free from that accursed patch of sea, his sanity was irrevocably fractured. The logbook abruptly ended, replaced by pages filled with geometric patterns eerily similar to Thomas's later drawings, and repetitions of a single chidden phrase. The debt is sworn, the silence speaks. His return to Port Fairhaven was not one of triumph, but of a broken spirit, a mind haunted by echoes of the deep. The madness that followed, the cyclical disappearances, the unyielding draw to the Sargasso, it all began with that single devastating encounter. The stones, it seemed, had marked their lineage, binding them to a truth too terrible for human minds to fully grasp. But what exactly was the nature of this ancient debt, and what did it demand of the Blackwood bloodline even centuries later? The silence clinging to Port Fairhaven had transformed. No longer mere historical weight, but an active, chilling presence. The rhythmic crash of waves, once a lullaby, now sounded like an inexorable countdown. It was then the first true anomalies emerged. Fishermen reported strange, unnatural lights beneath the ocean's surface at night. Not bioluminescence, but sustained glows, like submerged beacons calling from an unseen depth, their origin utterly unknown. Then came the currents. Seasoned mariners, knowing the Atlantic's temperament, battled unpredictable eddies. Sarah sought scientific explanations but found no answers. The anomalies defied patterns, mocking human understanding. They were specters in the water, echoes of something monumental struggling to surface. The air in Port Fairhaven thickened, heavy with an ozone tang after the lights appeared. Compasses spun erratically, radios crackled with phantom voices like mournful singing. Whales breached with frantic desperation, their calls painful. Birds abandoned coastal perches, flying inland as if fleeing an unseen predator. This wasn't merely a family curse, it was an affliction spreading, a ripple from a central, submerged disturbance. Are you ready to uncover the secrets of the deep? What if these anomalies are not isolated, but tendrils of a vaster, malevolent influence from the Sargasso, testing its ancient prison. Elias, haunted by dreams of submerged cities and melodic stone, felt drawn to the sea despite his fear. His mind, a battlefield, fought hereditary madness. Sarah watched, helpless, as he drifted, pulled by inherited memory and an ancient summons. The physical world mirrored the Blackwood Line's disintegration. What horrifying secret did the Sargasso Sea begin to leak into their world? And how much longer could Port Fairhaven and the Blackwood family withstand its insidious touch? Captain Elijah Blackwood was no stranger to the ocean's unpredictable temperament. His reputation, forged in the crucible of the late 18th century maritime world, spoke of courage, cunning, and an almost supernatural ability to navigate treacherous waters. But even his seasoned resolve would be tested by the voyage that sealed his family's fate. A journey into the heart of the Atlantic's most enigmatic expanse, the Sargasso Sea. Here, beneath a canopy of perpetual calm, where currents converge and golden sargassum weed stretches in an unending labyrinth, Elijah Blackwood steered his brig, the Serpent's Coil, towards an unknown destiny. His logs, meticulously preserved, tell a story of escalating strangeness. Compass needles spun wildly. The very air grew heavy with an unspoken pressure, and whispers, faint yet insistent, seemed to rise from the glassy surface itself. Then, amidst a patch of weed, thicker than any known, something appeared. Not a natural formation, but an impossibility. A structure, dark and monolithic, rising from the abyssal depths like a forgotten dream. Its lines were too perfect, too alien for any human hand. Its material unlike any known stone. It defied logic, a silent sentinel from a time before time. Was this the singing stone Thomas Blackwood scrawled about? Was this the origin of the insidious melody that haunted the Blackwood Line? Elijah's account speaks of profound, disorienting awe. He described intricate geometric carvings pulsing with a faint inner light, and colossal, eyeless figures carved into the edifice, figures that watched with ancient, terrifying stillness. These were not statues. They were guardians, imbued with a palpable, chilling presence. What ancient civilization could have crafted such a thing, in a place so hostile to life, so far from human reach? This submerged colossus shattered every known boundary of history and human endeavor. The captain's initial impulse, driven by curiosity, was to explore. He sent divers down, men who returned not with treasures, but with haunted eyes and the first symptoms of the insidious madness that would plague their lineage. They spoke of a sound, a low, resonant thrumming that vibrated not just through the water, but through their very bones. A sound that carried a voice older than thought, weaving itself into the fabric of their minds. This was no ordinary discovery. It was an encounter with something primordial. A presence that imprinted itself upon the consciousness of those who dared to trespass. What precisely did Captain Blackwood and his crew bring back from that impossible place? Was it merely a memory, a sound, a vision that poisoned their minds? Or did something tangible, something malevolent and utterly alien, latch onto the Serpent's Coil, embedding itself within the Blackwood lineage, demanding an eternal, terrifying tithe? The answer, etched in the depths of human folly and the unfathomable mysteries of the Sargasso, would forever redefine their very existence. Join us as we prepare to confront the ultimate truth of their desperate inheritance. The air in the Blackwood home had grown thick. palpable with the unspoken dread that clung to Elias like the salt spray to the ancient glass of their windows. Sarah watched her father, his eyes glazed with a distant, haunted look, his hands trembling as he clutched a worn, leather-bound journal, Thomas's last record. The whispers of the house, once mere creaks and groans, seemed to coalesce into something more coherent, a low, resonant hum that vibrated not just in the floorboards, but deep within the very bones of those present. The investigative team from the Unspoken Sea, their cameras trained, their faces etched with a mix of academic curiosity and mounting unease, felt it too, a subtle shift in the atmospheric pressure, a strange chill that defied the ambient temperature. Then it began. Not a sound from the outside world, but from within the very fabric of the old house. A low, sustained tone, rising slowly, piercing the silence, yet seeming to emanate from nowhere and everywhere at once. It was a sound both alien and profoundly ancient, resonating with a frequency that vibrated through the sternum, blurring the edges of perception. Elias let out a guttural cry, his grip on the journal tightening to white-knuckled desperation. He began to speak, his voice not his own, but a fractured echo of a language long dead, words that seemed to spill from an abyss far deeper than any ocean trench. He spoke of the resonance, of the pull, of the guardians awakened. His mind, a fortress against generations of inherited terror, finally buckled. But it was not just Elias. Sarah gasped, clutching her head as a searing pain lanced through her temples. She could hear it now, distinctly. A chorus of voices, not human, but something vast, primordial, singing a melody of crushing pressure and infinite cold. It was the singing stones from Thomas's journal, manifesting not as physical objects, but as an unbearable sonic assault on the mind itself. The lights in the room flickered violently, then plunged into a near-total blackout, momentarily illuminated only by the frantic red blinking of the cameras. A chill so profound it felt like the very heat was being sucked from their bodies, permeated the room. Objects on shelves rattled, then a heavy book slammed to the floor, as if propelled by an unseen force. This was no mere madness. It was an echo, a resonance from the depths. An active demonstration of the entity's reach. The Blackwood curse was not a metaphor, nor a simple psychological inheritance. It was a tether, a line of descent directly connected to an intelligence, an ancient presence stirred from its aeons-long slumber. The question that had haunted them was no longer if the Sargasso held something unfathomable, but how profoundly that something could invade their reality, manifesting its will in the heart of their ancestral home. Had Captain Blackwood not merely discovered a temple, but inadvertently established a conduit, a doorway through which the abyss could reclaim its due? And if so, what terrifying toll was it now demanding, directly from the living? Breathing descendants of its first trespasser, the phenomenon was real, and it was here. The whispers from the deep, once confined to Thomas's frantic journal, now resonate with a chilling clarity. We've spoken of the singing stones, a fragment of his descent into the unknown. But what if these weren't mere metaphorical melodies? What if they were an actual, ancient transmission, a frequency designed not to invite, but to repel? The Blackwood madness, the insidious decay of their minds, might not be a curse in the conventional sense, but a horrifying resonance, a psychic echo of Captain Elijah's fateful intrusion. Imagine a world beneath the waves, not merely home to silent depths, but vibrant with a spectrum of unheard sounds, frequencies that pierce the veil of our understanding. Ancient cultures, from the Maori to the Norse, spoke of lands that sang, of mountains that hummed with forgotten power. Could the Sargasso, with its abyssal secrets, harbor such a place? And could these singing stones be a form of active acoustic defense designed to protect something unimaginably old, something that resents intrusion? The guardians Thomas scribbled about. Perhaps they are not monstrous leviathans, but manifestations of this very energy, constructs of sound and light that exist to deter, to disorient, to drive mad those who draw too close. Captain Elijah Blackwood, in his reckless pursuit of privateering glory, might have been the first to cross this invisible sonic barrier. His initial encounter, recorded perhaps in fragmented, delirious logs, could have imprinted upon his very being, and by extension, upon his bloodline, a susceptibility to these frequencies, the recurring madness, the generations lost to the sea. Not a random fate, but a targeted response, a defense mechanism triggered anew whenever a Blackwood descendant approached the forbidden zone. This theory, unsettling as it is, gains chilling traction when we examine obscure hydrographic charts from the late 19th century, suppressed for decades, that show inexplicable sonar anomalies near the very coordinates Thomas meticulously mapped. These aren't just geological formations. They hint at structured, pulsating energy fields, patterns that defy natural explanation. They suggest a deliberate design, a conscious, almost living boundary. Are we not dealing with a mere sunken relic, but an active, ancient sentinel, its purpose to guard against a world it no longer trusts? The Blackwood's agony, their hereditary torment, becomes a stark warning. Their bloodline, intrinsically linked to that first transgression, is not just cursed, but is a beacon for the ancient depths, a perpetual target. Elias's encroaching madness, Sarah's intuitive dread. They are experiencing a heightened manifestation of this deep-sea retaliation. The search for Thomas, for understanding, is no longer just about a missing person. It is about confronting a living boundary, a primordial intelligence that views humanity as an invasive species. Are we merely witnessing the slow, agonizing retribution for a trespass committed centuries ago? Or is something far grander, far more terrifying, about to awaken from its aeons-long slumber? We have journeyed through the Blackwood lineage, charting the chilling progression of a curse that transcends mere superstition. From Captain Elijah's fateful encounter to Thomas's tragic vanishing, a pattern emerges, not just of maritime demise, but of a descent into madness, a fracturing of the mind that precedes the deep's final embrace. But what if this mental unraveling isn't just a symptom, but an integral part of the entity's insidious grip? What if the singing stones Thomas described weren't merely an external phenomenon, but a key to unlocking the true terror within? New forensic analysis of Thomas's salvaged recordings, combined with historical medical records of the Blackwood family, paint a horrifying picture. Researchers from the University of Maine, working in conjunction with our team, discovered an anomalous auditory frequency embedded within the deep-sea soundings Thomas had obsessively charted. A frequency almost subliminal, just beyond the normal range of human hearing, yet undeniably present. It's a low hum, interwoven with a complex pattern of resonant tones that seems to replicate the very brainwave patterns associated with extreme auditory hallucinations and profound psychological distress. The Blackwood madness, it seems, might not be a genetic predisposition, but an induced state, a symphony of decay. This revelation brings us back to the sunken guardians. Could these not be physical beings, but the source of this sonic assault? Ancient, self-sustaining constructs that broadcast a frequency designed to dismantle the human mind, to lure, to subdue? The idea challenges our very understanding of life and intelligence. We are forced to consider a form of ancient sentience that operates not through physical force, but through a vibrational resonance, a melody of madness that whispers promises of the abyss. Elias, now isolated in the ancestral home, has begun to report fleeting auditory phenomena, faint echoes of what he describes as a chorus from the deep, a sound he dismisses as the onset of his own inevitable decline, but which we now recognize as a terrifying, undeniable echo of Thomas's own final days. The curse, it seems, is not merely a metaphor. It is a meticulously orchestrated assault. The question then becomes chillingly clear. If the Sargasso entity communicates through a song of madness, designed to draw its victims into its watery embrace, what happens when the last remaining Blackwoods, those bearing the very lineage of the first intrusion, begin to hear the call directly? Can Elias and Sarah withstand a psychological onslaught designed over centuries, or is their destiny already sealed by a note only their bloodline can truly perceive? The specialist, Dr. Eris Thorne, gestured towards a collection of ancient charts, their parchment brittle with age and seawater stains that seemed to mimic forgotten continents. For centuries, he began, his voice low but resonant, these accounts were relegated to the realm of sailors' superstitions. Whispers of phosphorescent currents that coiled with unnatural intent. Tales of ships caught in an impossible stasis, their very timbers groaning as if under a physical press. Their crews driven to an unspeakable madness by an unheard song that burrowed into the very marrow of their bones. He tapped a specific point on one chart, eerily close to the Sargasso's documented anomalies, a place marked by an archaic glyph, a circle bisected by a jagged line. But what if these were not superstitions, not the fever dreams of men lost to the sea, but observations? Early navigators, unlike us, perhaps lacked the scientific lexicon to describe what they truly witnessed. Not mere currents, but a living, pulsating field of energy, a consciousness, a will. He drew a stark, unwavering line between Captain Blackwood's known expedition route and a historical record of a colonial merchant vessel, the Sea Serpent, lost without a trace in the same enigmatic gyre almost a century prior. The logs of the Sea Serpent, recently unearthed from obscure archives, speak with chilling detail of an unusual harmonic resonance emanating from the abyssal depths, a sound that permeated the very timbers of the ship, twisting the minds of men into knots of terror and despair, before the vessel simply vanished, leaving no wreckage. This is where the historical meticulously intersects with the utterly impossible, the factual merging with the fantastical. Thorne connected this chilling account directly to Thomas's journal entries, those feverish scribblings about singing stones and the desperate, indecipherable pleas of dread guardians. What Thomas experienced, what the Blackwood lineage has endured for generations, is not a supernatural curse in the conventional sense, a magical hex upon their blood. No, it is a highly targeted, physiological response to an ancient defense mechanism. The sunken temple in the Sargasso is not merely guarded by passive structures. It is active, profoundly so, a sentinel force awakened to expel intruders. The room fell into an echoing silence, the raw weight of his words pressing down, heavier than any ocean current. Sarah's eyes widened with a horrifying yet undeniable realization. Elias, his face etched with a grim mix of dread and a dawning, terrible comprehension, finally saw the pattern, the cold, calculated logic behind their suffering. The family madness, the inexplicable disappearances, the relentless pull towards the deep. They weren't random misfortunes. They were the methodical attrition by a profound ancient intelligence, a patient force protecting its sanctuary. The curse, Dr. Thorne continued, his voice now a grave pronouncement, is in essence an immune response, a biological or perhaps even a consciousness-based rejection of those who repeatedly trespass upon an ancient, highly sensitive domain. Captain Blackwood did not merely discover a structure, he activated a dormant sentinel, a guardian of unfathomable antiquity, and the payment, generation after chilling generation, has been extracted in minds broken and lives swallowed by the insatiable deep. This was the chilling clarity Elias and Sarah had sought, yet it offered no comfort, only the terrifying scale of their predicament. Their ancestors were not cursed by an angry god, but by a precise, ancient intelligence that saw their bloodline as a perpetual debt. The final confrontation for the Blackwoods is not a battle of wills against some mythical beast, but a stark, terrifying understanding that they are irrevocably tied to an entity that has been patiently, relentlessly dismantling their line. The question now isn't if they can escape, but how one severs a debt owed to the very fabric of the deep, a debt that permeates the very water they sail upon. Are you ready to confront the ultimate price of discovery? Dive with us into this unexplored abyssal world. The silence of Port Fairhaven, once a heavy shroud, now carries a different resonance for Elias and Sarah Blackwood. The madness, the insatiable pull towards the Sargasso, it receded. Not vanished, perhaps, but quelled. Thomas, tragically, was never found, his fate echoing generations of Blackwood men claimed by the deep. Yet, in the wake of our journey, a fragile peace, born of terrible knowledge, settled upon the crumbling ancestral home. Elias, no longer fighting the encroaching shadow, now watches the sea with a quiet understanding, a reverence for the ancient forces that once consumed his lineage. Sarah, forever marked by the grief of her brother's loss, has found a new purpose. She meticulously archives the family's journals, the strange maps, the fragments of lore, becoming an unintentional chronicler of the inexplicable, a guardian of the truth her ancestors paid such a terrible price to glimpse. The Blackwood legacy, once a curse of demise, has transformed into a profound, if somber, vigil. They are no longer merely victims, but witnesses, inheritors of a terrible beauty. The sunken temple of the Sargasso Sea, glimpsed through the haze of a dying man's final vision, remains an elusive, terrifying promise. Our investigation did not provide blueprints or definitive proof, but it unearthed a tapestry of whispers, a convergence of myth and anomaly that challenges the very bedrock of our perceived reality. It redefined the very concept of a curse, transforming it from a mere superstition into a living, breathing consequence of ancient intrusion. The singing stones and sunken guardians are no longer the fevered ramblings of a dying man, but echoes of a truth far older than human memory, a truth that sleeps beneath the shifting currents of the Sargasso, stirring only when disturbed. What does it mean, then, for a family to be tied to such an entity? What unseen debts did Captain Elijah Blackwood incur, not just for his descendants, but perhaps for all of humanity? The ocean, vast and unknowable, holds more than just undiscovered species and geological wonders. It harbors forgotten histories, ancient sentinels, and perhaps intelligences that predate our very concept of civilization. This journey into the Sargasso, guided by the tragic thread of the Blackwood family, forces us to confront the profound arrogance of our exploration, the hubris of believing we are the sole masters of this planet. The deep does not merely hold secrets, it holds a memory, a consciousness that silently observes the fleeting dance of human endeavor on its surface. Are we truly alone in the vastness of the cosmos, or do forgotten civilizations, far below the churning waves, mock our terrestrial perspectives? What other ancient packs lie buried beneath the waves, forgotten by time but not by the ocean itself? The Sargasso Sea, a realm of strange currents and ancient secrets, continues its silent vigil, its depths guarding mysteries that resonate with the oldest myths of our world. The Blackwood family's terrifying truth is but a single, harrowing note in a symphony of unknown wonders and horrors that still await us. Join us as we continue to probe the shadows where history blurs into legend, where the known world ends and the truly extraordinary begins. Subscribe to the Unspoken Sea and dive with us into the abyssal unknown. For every answered question only illuminates a dozen more. The search for truth never ends, and ours is just beginning.